Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering.
We're doing a very special episode today. Today, Tristan is going to be in the hot seat, and we're going to learn a lot more about Tristan the human, Tristan the founder and CEO of DBT Labs, and Tristan the thought leader pushing the analytics engineering practice to new highs. This episode has been in the works for a while, and we polled our community for what they'd like to learn about Tristan in this AMA. And I'll be sprinkling in questions from all of you into our conversation. Tristan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I knew I'd get a laugh. So I wanted to start off with some questions about your background. Actually, we'll start off with today is your birthday, so we'll wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you.
Finally turning 28, is that right?
Where was I recently? I was at the dentist and the hygienist said you could pass for 28. And I was like, yeah, okay. Thanks. Tips will be coming.
Well, happy birthday. But we're going to start off with some questions about your background and how you became the person you are today. So we'll start off with some softballs.
Just for everyone listening, Julia tried to send me the questions ahead of time so that I could be prepared, but I refused. And I wanted to go in cold. So I'm excited to be surprised.
I kept the spicy ones in there. So should be a good one. We're starting off easy, though. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a little town called Hereford, which is about 30 minutes north of Baltimore, Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States.
And what were your parents like growing up? Any siblings?
I have a younger brother. He's 2 years younger, and a younger sister. She's 4 years younger. I grew up on 3.5 acres. I had chickens, probably like 12 chickens. I had 5 cats, most of them outdoor. We had a garden. I ate way too many vegetables out of that garden. In my young life, I was sick of zucchini at the end of every summer. To this day, I will not eat zucchini. My dad was an English teacher and then an assistant principal, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Is this where your love for writing came from, potentially?
I don't think so, honestly. I mean, okay, maybe there was certainly some influence there. My dad was a great storyteller as a kid. He just had such a deep knowledge of like so much literature that anytime we were like in the car for 45 minutes, which we were frequently, he would tell us the story of Theseus and the Minotaur or, whatever. Like I knew a lot of literature in these like kid bite-sized versions. But no, I didn't enjoy writing until I could write publicly on the internet, which happened for me at like age 21 or 22. I had the good fortune to be friends, mostly not in high school, mostly in college, with the founder of Squarespace, Anthony Casalina. And so I think to this day, I'm like account ID number 7 or something like that on
Very cool.
On Squarespace. And so this is in like 2003. It's not like blogging was brand new. Like people had been writing words on the internet for a lot longer than that, but it was still early days of the concept of blogging. And I just really, as a kid, the internet had always felt cool. Like I had a 28.8 modem and all of this stuff. And just the idea that like I could easily put my words on the internet made me find a love of like trying to think things through publicly. And then, every once in a while I would get like 100 people to view a post that I would write. And it was just like a big rush. I mean, I remember writing a post on this is like the early days of the internet, or at least early days of blogging. And I wrote a post on my thoughts on gun control and the Second Amendment. And that ended up getting a lot of views. Maybe not the kind of conversation in my comments section that I had looked for. That was my first brush up with like, maybe you want to self-censor a little bit with exactly what parts of your internal state you want to share with everyone online.
That's super interesting. So I remember hearing that story and I kind of freaked out because I remember I had listened to the How I Built This podcast with the founder of Squarespace, and I had no idea that you were very close with him in college and had a tiny part of that founder story, or not founder story, but you were around when Squarespace was becoming a thing. Like, why do you think you've been drawn to tech? Have you had like other models of entrepreneurship? Has that relationship paid off in really interesting ways throughout your life?
No, I mean, I was drawn to tech for the same reason that like other kids my age So, we were talking about my birthday. I just turned 41, which means that I got a 28.8 modem when I was like 12 or 13 or something. And so it was like, the right time for me, like the level of complexity required to get online was reasonably high, but I was also at a point in my life where I was like willing to sit down and like figure out all of these, like, I don't even remember I think it was called Kali, the protocol that allowed me to play multiplayer World of Warcraft 2 back in the day. But like the two lines intersected of like my own capabilities as a human and like the complexity of getting online, and it just felt like this really exciting world that was, I pictured it as like the frontier in the same way that like people explored the American frontier in like the mid 1800s. It was like a new space opened up, and it felt exciting to move into. But no, I had literally no models of entrepreneurship in my life at all until I was living across the hall from Anthony, when he was just like, yeah, I'm going to spend $30,000 on servers, and we'll see how this thing goes.
That's amazing. I think one last question about you, Tristan the human, before we get into some more of your story. But one of the things I admire most about you is you're super long-term focused. So you have this clarity of vision, and you're not easily distracted by near term, or maybe what other people should say you should be doing in the near term. Have you always been like that? Or do you think that was a skill set that you developed over time? I'm thinking about Tristan as a young kid. He probably would not eat that marshmallow. He'd wait because he knew there was something better coming around. How did you develop that?
It's interesting. I don't totally resonate with that description of myself. And I understand what you're saying, and I try hard to be the way that you're describing. But I have a real grass is greener struggle internally. Like, I hate the idea that I only have one life to live. Like, I want to live everybody's life. I want to live your life and the life of a rural farmer in India. Like, I want to like experience everything. So the idea that for me to be consistent, to be long-term focused in like one thing is actually quite a struggle. I will say that I wanted to move to the West Coast when I was in my 20s, and it's not for any particularly good reason that I didn't do that. I probably just like didn't try hard enough. And I have a lot of family and friends gravity that keeps me on the East Coast. But I feel very fortunate to live outside of a major tech hub. I'm not in San Francisco. I'm not in New York. I'm in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And, this is not a knock on Philly, honestly. Like, there's some good companies here, but it's not a part of the culture. Like, I don't hang out with tech people. And so there isn't this ever happening conversation of what's next. Oh, did you hear about this? And who should we acquire? I mean, gosh, people get together in San Francisco and they talk about like what company is acquiring what company. And I'm just like, man, that's not my social life.
Yeah, that feels very resonant to me. And as a San Francisco, I grew up in New York and moved to San Francisco, but you can easily get caught up in what a friend is doing and what success they might be having. I think sometimes you were able to just focus on things that excited you, which is like a vision for a new way of doing data. And that really grounded you in the journey that you decided to go on personally, and then along with others at bringing DBT Labs.
One of our values is we work hard and go home. So I take it seriously that even though I care a lot about the work that I do and derive a ton of satisfaction from it, I'm pretty religious about shutting my laptop at 5 p.m. And I know that that's a strange thing to say in a lot of tech circles. Like, I think that people aspirationally do that, but oftentimes don't actually live up to that. But I'm pretty consistent about that. And it means that a lot of the change and like newness in my life comes like when my laptop is shut.
I'll have to give it a try.
Crazy, right?
Okay, so I want to talk about DBT, which I'm sure lots of people are curious about hearing how it started. But I think before we actually go into the Fishtown Analytics saga, there's a chapter before that, which is RJ Metrics. And RJ Metrics has like an important role in your life, and also lots of other people at Fishtown Analytics. Is kind of how you found some of the great humans that came and joined you eventually on this journey. Tell us about RJ Metrics. What was it?
RJ is such an interesting story. It taught me so much. Before going in too much depth there, I want to first start by saying that this story has been told publicly by the CEO, the then CEO of RJ Metrics, Bob Moore. And so I'm not being controversial or anything when I say that RJ probably didn't go exactly the way that any of us had thought in the early days when we had big dreams of success. But that's not to say that it didn't achieve some like really fantastic things. And a lot of us learn a lot of things along the way. The RJ story at the highest level was like two guys, Bob and Jake, founded a company while they were at Insight Venture Partners, and they were analysts there. They were like, Bob in particular was responsible for running a lot of the due diligence on companies that Insight was DDing. And he developed a way of doing this analysis that was really routinized and effective. And so he attempted to create a company that would help with analytics in this kind of model of the world. And the challenge, I think, was ultimately a timing challenge. So that 2008 turns out to have been, looking back on it in hindsight, like a really bad time to start like what was fundamentally a business intelligence company. And I say that because it was like 3-4 years prior to Redshift. And I've written publicly about this, like the advent of Amazon Redshift, like really upended the BI industry. It reshaped, it was the kind of very beginnings of the modern data stack. And the way that you built a BI tool pre-Redshift was very different than the way you built a BI tool post-Redshift. And so RJ was really kind of on top of the world in the 2012, 2013 time horizon. I joined in 2013, had a fantastic client list, and started to raise what at the time seemed like a lot of money. And then Redshift came out. And of course, at the beginning, it takes a long time for anything to make any impact, but that didn't really register on our radars. It didn't seem like a thing that we should care too much about. But then by 2014, we were getting in deals with companies like Mode and Looker, these like upstarts. And by 2015, we were like reasonably consistently losing those deals. And we had to, the architecture of the product, like fundamentally was not that well suited to the modern cloud data warehouse. Like actually, the original database that underlay the product was MySQL, if you can believe it. And a lot of the data processing was done in PHP. It seems really nuts today, 13 years on, but that just seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. So we had to figure out what to do. It was clear that we weren't going to rebuild the product from scratch with the whole customer base and revenue base and everything. And so what we ended up doing was, Bob and Jake orchestrated this fantastic move where the existing business, the BI business, was sold to Magento, and that in turn capitalized the spin-off of Stitch. So Stitch ended up being created from all of this, and it was a core part of the RJ Metrics technology became Stitch, and that ended up working much better with the modern data stack, and still is very widely used and now housed inside of Talend.
I think one of the really interesting pieces for me in reading about RJ Metrics, I read an article from Bob who talked about what they got wrong, meaning they built, he described it as a terminal. So they wanted to be the one-stop platform for everything. They didn't think about ecosystem. And so he's gone off and built another company, Crossbeam, which is a partnership relationship management software. And then I think about DBT and our approach to ecosystem and open source, and thinking about we won't be successful unless we change an industry and we bring a lot of partners along with us. I found that to be a really striking direction for both you and for the Crossbeam to go on that journey.
Totally. I think that Bob and I internalized the same lesson there. We both did different things with that, but RJ as a product attempted to do all of the different parts of what we now call the modern data stack, because it didn't exist yet. And so in order to build a BI tool, you had to do all of the stuff. You had to ingest the data, you had to store and process it, you had to transform it, you had to have a dashboarding component. And so if you can imagine a little startup that had a couple $1 million in funding trying to do all of that stuff, which now there's literally billions of dollars raised to
ambitious.
It's not going to work. The way I responded to that was have incredibly clear ideas for what DBT was and was not going to do, an incredibly clear understanding of, in the early days, how I was going to assemble a data stack for the consulting clients that I worked with. It was always going to be a best of breed stack. We were going to see the solution as multiple layers, and which tool worked best and which layer was a choice to be made for each client.
Got it. So RJ gets sold. I think another fun, interesting fact about that part in your history is that's when you met Drew and Janessa. So Drew has this fun, and Connor, and you have Drew has this fun snippet on his LinkedIn where he says, I think he was your intern. He's reporting to the VP of marketing. Was it clear to you back then that you absolutely had to work with these people? Did you at all imagine how your futures would be so entangled today?
Aaron also. Connor and I did not work directly together, but we became gym buddies, actually. We like multiple times a week, we'd go to the gym together. And very quickly, it seemed obvious to me that like I wanted to work with Connor long term. Drew, who, yes, was in college at that point, it was also like incredibly clear to me that he was the kind of person that should start a company. I didn't actually see myself starting a company, so I was actually trying to convince him to drop out of school and start a company with one of my other friends.
Oh,
but
wow.
He ended up not doing that, which, good for me. But he's just like an all-around athlete and able to do such a like wide range of stuff, and also cannot tolerate organizational bullshit. So yeah, there were a lot of good seeds inside of the RJ Metrics organization, and I think I managed to convince a couple of the good ones to join me.
Yeah. Okay. So in 2016, you started data consultancy, Fishtown Analytics. I think you've written about it a lot, so I won't go completely into that story about how you set out and what you were trying to accomplish. People really want to know, was DBT the winning name from the start, or did you have a different idea than Data Build Tool as being the name for the product that you were going to be building alongside at Fishtown Analytics?
No one really named DBT the product. DBT, the repo. So like originally, DBT was an open source project started inside of Stitch. We got Jake, the CEO of Stitch, to approve us working on this as a marketing project because I had used the data that came out of Stitch in the early days, and it was a struggle to work with. There was just so, you plug in the Facebook connector and you just get so many tables that show up in the schema. And I was just like, I have no idea what's going on here. I want to like measure ad ROI. And so I was like, well, it seems like, our product team has enough going on. It seems like it might actually be a really good marketing tool. And the story of like why a data person ran marketing, I think in the early stages of a B2B SaaS company, demand generation is everything, and it's very quantitative. And so that would like really appealed to my data brain. But so the idea of like an open source community to create packages for Stitch connectors to make them easier to use and create content around like what you could do with this data once you like installed this package on top of it. That was like the entire idea. That's why DBT had a package manager in like, I don't know, month 2 or something, because it was actually like a core part of the whole idea.
Wow.
Anyway,
I didn't even know this. This is great.
Yeah, like that was like why DBT existed. And Chris Merrick, the CTO of Stitch, made the very first commit to the DBT repo. He named the DBT repo, and it wasn't some like brilliant product name. He was just like, I don't know, I couldn't think of what to call it. I had been using Scala recently. Scala has this thing called SBT, Scala Build Tool. So I just called it DBT. And we all actually, Chris kind of liked it, but the rest of us kind of hated it. But we just like never thought of a better name. And so at a certain point, that's the name.
And what's with the lowercase?
Because it's what you type over and over again on the command line. And I don't actually know if the CLI is case sensitive. No one types in capital letters on the CLI.
That's true.
So it's supposed to evoke like what it looks like on the screen when you type it 100 times a day. Okay.
And finally, is it a fidget spinner or not, our logo? What is the orange fidget-like spinner icon?
It has often been called the fidget spinner. The first version of it was meant to evoke a spanner, like a wrench, turning some like mechanical thing. It was really coming. I wrote a blog post in the early Fishtown Analytics days called Analytics as a Trade, where I really think of a lot of what we do as data analysts to be, you can't touch it, but in my brain at least, it feels very spatial. It feels like I'm manipulating spatial things. It feels, I'm not touching things with my hands, but it feels the same in the same space to me. And so I've always resonated towards metaphors that were evocative of physical work.
Got it. So the beginning of Fishtown Analytics is pretty different than how other companies may have gotten started, at least companies that look like us today. 10,000 personal investment, bootstrap, profitable in Philly, non-tech startup, but things were really working. I think one of the things that everyone at DBT Labs knows very deeply is that our values and mission are at the core of everything that we do. And I think they're codified and people really live and talk about them quite a bit at DBT Labs. When did you write down the mission and our values? Was that Fishtown Analytics Day at inception, or when did you realize that this was going to be super important to everything we do?
The mission has changed over time. I mean, the mission on day one was like, do good work with clients that I cared about and that gave me more control over my time. Like, it was a mission for a company of one person. The values have actually been largely unchanged since before the company was created. I have my own feelings on my own like complicated relationship with capitalism. I have an undergrad and a grad degree in business. My grad degree is actually in sustainability. And so I have a lot of respect for the positive force of capitalism in the world. And I also believe that unrestrained capitalism isn't always in society's best interests. And so I'd never really seen myself as a founder, and I had some trepidation for stepping into this role of founder entrepreneur. And so I wanted to write down, almost to hold myself accountable, I wanted to write down a set of values where like I could look back on what I had done over a year or 2 years or 5 years and say like, am I doing the thing that I set out to do? And the nice thing is that like, as we've changed our understanding of like what the company is here to do, as DBT has taken off, as the community has asked different things from us, the organization, fortunately, it is our values who have actually created the space for these opportunities to present themselves. And so the values have been really remarkably consistent throughout the 5.5-year journey now.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's been pretty consistent is community. I think very early on, you wrote that the key to our future is community, and you really invested in those relationships and giving more than you took from the community. Brian Offit wanted to ask, how do you think growing up in a small town influenced how you think about community? Or was that not really the driver on how you think about community?
I could try to make that connection. And there is a certain, maybe there's a little bit of that there. I would say actually the early days of community for me was probably two things. One, so I had literally zero interest in trying to convince people to work with me. I mean, sure, if they wrote me an email and said like, hey, I'd like to talk about doing a consulting project, I was like happy to tell them why I thought I'd do a good job of that. But I had zero interest of like going to all my friends and saying like, hey, connect me to your friends who run companies, and like the whole outbound sales thing, which is like, generally, if you run a consulting company, like that's what you're doing most of your time. You're like trying to do business development. And so for me, a big part of community was like a way to spread the word of the way that I did work. That, at the time it was Drew and I did work, such that some people would knock on our door as opposed to me trying to have to go convince them to talk to me. And that actually worked. It was via community that we landed essentially all of our consulting. Like, I've never outbound sold a consulting engagement. We've done, I don't know, hundreds of them. So that was that. And it was also partially, for anybody who's done this, the early days of founding a company are incredibly lonely. It was me sitting in my home office, and my wife would leave for work at 7:30, 8 a.m. and I'd see her again at 6:30. And like in the meantime, some days I would literally have talked to zero people. And so just like having other people, I mean, most of us like use Slack, and there's other people in the Slack with you, but Slack is like a surprisingly lonely experience with like 2 people in it. It's just like very quiet. So the community was just like other people who were doing the work that were like, we could all hang out. And I think that's why I've always had this peer relationship with the community. It's not come out of a desire to spread the word of DBT. It's a thing that I wanted to be a part of too.
Yeah. I think it's also been a really interesting way that you've recruited people to DBT.
Yep.
Lots of our community members have now come and joined DBT because they're just so bought into the mission and want to continue to work with these people and you happen to be able to be in a position where you can also employ them, which is pretty cool. So you interview every single person who joins DBT Labs. You're the final interview, and you have a really unusual way of interviewing people where you get to the core of the person, you get their backgrounds. Tell us about this interview, where it came from, and how you've gotten such a unique style in the interview process.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to answer that question without ruining the experience for everybody that I ever interview in the future. So one of our values, and this one is actually, I credit with Drew, he put words around this. One of our values is we are human. And so there's this desire to integrate the personal and professional and just show up at work as who you are. And that actually enables us to have surprisingly close and real relationships with each other. And it's often hard to navigate because for a large number of reasons, it's not always easy to get along with every other human. You disagree on things, you rub each other the wrong way, whatever. And so there is risk associated with it, but I think that we've done a good job of creating an environment where people are able to navigate those challenges and still show up as themselves. Anyway, so my interview asks people to tell their life story, but really through the lens of some of the hardest things that they've had to deal with in their lives. Not because it is, we all like to tell our stories as like our high notes. You know, I've done all this amazing stuff, but I think we tend to be our most human when we talk about our screw ups or the hard moments of adversity that we've had to go through. And it's really a test to see if somebody's willing to go there. Because if that person's willing to go there, then they're going to be willing to show up in our environment as a real human. And it turns out that like that is the superpower of team members here. That's what allows us to work collaboratively across the organization in a non-hierarchical way. It's what leads to our employee engagement score of 90, which is like I've never heard of before. Like that humanity is kind of like the central thing that makes it all work.
Very cool. Plug for people who are interested in coming to work here. It's awesome. So I want to shift to make sure we get enough questions in from our community. We're going to go talk a little bit more about the industry and the profession. We talk a lot about the modern data stack. We've struggled to actually define what the modern data stack means, but it's something about being in the cloud and composable. Good episode from Ben Stansel, if you haven't listened to it already. But Shamik Ghosh wants to know what from the old data stack is still the most relevant in the modern data stack and why. Or maybe said a different way, like what's not going away?
Gosh, what is not going away? I mean, I think all the technologies are going away. Literally the products, the lines of code, like all of that's going away. But the jobs to be done are not going anywhere. If you look back at the problems that data companies were solving in 1995, they're fundamentally not that different than what we're talking about today. You know, there was, where is your data located? How do you want to be able to process it? Your whole workflow of like transformation, cataloging, governance, all of that, which was called data integration, which is the worst term ever from my perspective. And then, you know, the whole set of analytical or BI capabilities, like all of that stuff is the wheel of time, or you know, time is a flat circle. We're going to be rebuilding that stuff on every new generation of technology forever. I think that one of the interesting things about quote unquote the modern data stack, and I've been on podcasts recently where I've been roasted for that. Like, what does that even mean? Are we going to still be saying that in 2050? And what the hell is modern then?
It's become a meme.
Yeah, sorts. Right. But when you move to the cloud, do we have the opportunity to kind of like break this chain? Do we like stop reinventing everything every 10 years? Because once SQL is just an abstraction for computation, and it no longer like matters exactly what box is running that SQL query for you, then you can start to think about it as like this API that you can build products on top of, like DBT. DBT doesn't actually care whether you're running on top of Postgres or Snowflake or Materialize. And these are like three products that are really fundamentally architecturally different. But SQL just becomes this API. And maybe you can forever have these like generations of technology that continue to progress forwards, but the layers above don't have to be completely rewritten every time, which is kind of what has happened in the past.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think cloud changes quite a bit, but there's still, as you said, some of the frustrations that people have today are very similar to what they were 10 years ago. So Sean Meehan had a really interesting question. He wanted some career advice on whether it's better to be the first data person bringing a company's data stack and literacy from 0 to 1, or is it better to join a more established data team where there's access to great mentors and knowledge sharing?
I can tell you what I did, and I can tell you the pros and cons of that. I frequently find myself giving advice to people who are in the early stages of like thinking through their companies or just getting off the ground. And so I know that this is not advice for data professionals, but the advice I always give is lots of startup founders, and many of the most successful ones had never worked at a startup before. But I had worked at 3 startups before I ever wanted to start my own. And by no means have I done a perfect job, but I think that I've managed to avoid some of the pitfalls that a first-time founder or somebody who had never been at another startup before might not have been able to foresee and avoid. So your career is probably going to be pretty long, and I don't think you should really be in a huge rush. You will get there. You will have time. I think that the amount that you can learn in other environments, as opposed to just like from figuring everything out yourself, is really dramatic at the beginning of your career. And I spent my first 5 years in a Big Four consulting company, and it was a very shotgun set of experiences. Like, it did all kinds of random crap, but I draw from that all the time still 15 years later. So I don't think there is a right answer, but I would actually say that the best thing that you get from joining an environment where you're not the only person is, okay, maybe mentorship, maybe that kind of stuff is useful, but I think it's like more cultural. How do you do work? What is a mental model for like approaching this particular type of problem? And it's sometimes stuff that's like very, very hard to get unless you're like literally shoulder to shoulder with people like working on stuff together.
Yeah, I was thinking myself how I would answer that question. And there are definitely trade-offs. I most resonate with that careers are long and try to surround yourself with really smart, bright people where you can learn from, and don't try to get anywhere in one place too quickly. Otherwise, it doesn't work out. But that's a trade-off, because I think big companies too, sometimes they have unique challenges where they can't get themselves into a modern data stack, or they can't get themselves to a new technology because they have such a deep investment.
Yeah, none of this should be like, so go work in an environment where you're using Informatica or like whatever. Let's just say like products products that are not a part of like the direction you want your career to go in.
Yeah. One of the cool things I remember hearing when I was thinking about investing in DBT and then eventually joining is like people only wanted to work at companies that had DBT. Like that was a recruiting philosophy, that they would no longer join a data team that didn't use DBT. And like I think that's pretty cool, because it's signaling of how you care about your data and your data teams. Like what are the workflows going to be? Okay, so moving on, we have a question from Tyler Hillary, who wants to know, DBT Labs has a value of moving up the stack. Are there specific training, mentorship, or development programs within the company, or what does that mean?
It's funny. We did this like mind mapping, whatever, like a kind of a brainstorming session that involved virtual Post-it notes earlier in this year where we talked about our values. And that one is the biggest outlier, moving up the stack. And it's less about training and developing new capabilities and all of this stuff. GitLab says it, GitLab's an inspiration for me in a lot of different ways, but just literally just because they post so much stuff publicly, it's like there's a lot to learn from. They put it as, we have short toes, which means it's hard to step on our toes because they're really short. And it's just this like stance of non-defensiveness. If somebody wants to be helpful, don't see it as encroachment, see it as being helpful. And so I think that sometimes in high growth environments, people have a natural tendency to be a little bit territorial, like, oh, this is the thing I own, or this is not your area. But moving up the stack is an acknowledgement that as our world changes really rapidly, our jobs will change with it. And often that means giving things away to other people. And what's hidden in those opportunities to give things away to other people is that it creates space for us to grow and learn and do new things. It's a little bit more of a stance or a mindset than it is like specifically a call to like always train yourself for something new.
Yeah, that's certainly resonant. I think especially in startups where everything's changing and, hopefully if things are going well, the opportunities become bigger. There's more problems to go solve. And so when I think about that value, it's more aligned with going on to the next important thing that matters, and how do you scale and have a growth mindset too in most of your work, because otherwise you won't be able to go and tackle that next set of problems that just get bigger and bigger because the opportunity is growing. This one's from Winnie at DBT Labs. What would you do for a living if you had to pick a profession or craft completely outside of the realm of tech, finance, business, and why?
Oh no, that's all of my realms. Well asked, Winnie. Does it have to actually be able to support me? I don't know. Like the thing that my retirement career, I want to be making pots and selling them at a local farmer's market. And I don't know that I could ever make enough money to pay rent doing that, but I could see myself like literally spending 40 hours a week making and firing clay pots.
We're talking about like clay pots. Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You like pottery.
I grew up doing it a little bit and took a class again a little while ago. This spring, I'm finally biting the bullet in a pottery wheel like at my house. I've been like fantasizing about doing that for a really long time, but have less time than I would like to spend working with my hands. But yeah, like one day I will happily talk your ear off at whatever party we're at together about how my new glazing techniques are going.
Very cool. Okay. And this is our wrap-up question. You might be familiar with it. We ask this to all our guests. But looking 10 years out, what do you hope will be true of the data industry?
This probably will not be a surprise to folks, but the big thing that I care about is getting more and more humans involved in the analytical process. And I am probably hopelessly optimistic about this. There's a lot of things that I'm a pessimist about, but I'm incurably optimistic about the capabilities of humans to engage in their world using data. And I think that one of the exciting things that's happened over the past 10 years is that we've invented a lot of technologies that move the conversation on from like the boring stuff. I would love to never have to have a conversation again about like how data moves from point A to point B. Like it's tremendously boring. It's important. It's like so important, but it's just like not a very interesting conversation. You just want it to work. The interesting conversation is like, what are all the things that need to exist such that a large percentage of humanity can treat data in the same way that it treats its other sensory organs? Like it literally is a way of extending our innate human sensory capabilities. It's a way of seeing the world. And I think that, I don't know if 10 years is long enough, but like that's the future that I wake up every morning to try to work towards.
It's a great answer. Thank you so much, Tristan. Where can people find you?
How about this? My favorite way to hear from people is on DBT Slack. I'm at Tristan. DM me anytime.
Awesome. And that's a wrap. This is our final episode of season 1 of the DBT Labs Analytics Engineering podcast. This has been just a tremendous amount of fun to have all these great guest speakers, and I'm excited for season 2.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Let us know if you have guest suggestions. We're very excited about getting folks who are in the trenches doing the work to come and talk about your day-to-day and share it with the world.
Awesome. The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs and is hosted by Tristan Handy and myself, Julia Schottenstein. Have comments, questions, or guest suggestions? Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com. Our producers are Jeff Fox and David Krevitt. If you enjoy the show, please drop a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening.